I don't know about you, but anyone who tells me they can predict the outcome of an MMA fight, I don't really believe. I mean, yes, you can make an educated guess if you know your fighters, but most of you probably know by now that anything can happen in mixed martial arts. That's part of what makes it so exciting. No matter how the start of a fight goes, it isn't over until it's over, and some of the most entertaining moments in the sport's history have come when fighters have found a way to come back from the jaws of defeat. I'm Balian from MMA On Point. Thank you as always to all of you Hall of Famers out there. We really appreciate the support you give us every single month. And these are the craziest MMA comebacks that get more and more insane. Right before we get started, I do want to say we excluded some comebacks if the fights were super short or if it was more of a comeback sequence or a singular moment. Like Robbie Lawler versus Melvin Manhoef, an insane comeback, but it was just one punch that changed everything. Kind of the same thing for Scott Smith versus Cell with the body shot. I think Scott was even winning that fight. Fedor versus Roundelman, that was an insane comeback after a massive slam, but that was pretty much immediate as well. And of course, if I missed any other big ones, you can let me know. But let's get on with the video. Tim Bosch versus Yan Okami. Two UFC middleweights met to bang it out, and the Japanese fighter Okami was showing that he was the more technical and faster man. After 2 rounds, he was busting Bosch up, just eating him with the jab and landing big, horrible knees as well. The big barbarian Bosch needed to pull something out of the bag in the 3rd round to win. Using every bit of his physical advantage, Tim managed to pressure immediately and eventually pin Okami against the fence and shoveled a bunch of uppercuts that ended the fight there and then.
Both trying to finish, and it is all over!
Without a doubt, Tim was only about to earn half a paycheck, but he gritted his teeth and basically said, screw it. Miesha Tate versus Holm. Holm had pretty much only just picked up the women's bantamweight title before they had her booked back in the cage to take on Miesha Tate. Now, Miesha had to do a lot to earn the second shot, but when it came down to the fight for basically, well, most of the fight, she couldn't really do anything. I mean, she controlled Holly in the 2nd round, but with just 2 minutes left in the fight, it seemed like she'd come a long way back to a title shot for nothing. After struggling throughout the entire contest to get a takedown, she dived on one in the final moments, dragged Holly to the mat and managed to submit her. Everyone had been pretty much ready to just pack up and go home, but Tate stole the belt in the closing seconds with a phenomenal submission comeback. Scott Smith versus Kung Lee. Over in Strikeforce back in the day, there was a middleweight champion called Kung Lee. You might have seen him in a few movies because of his traditional martial arts skills. But that shit was also working in the cage, and in his return fight in Strikeforce against Scott Smith, he put on a clinic. I mean, the 1st round was completely one-sided. I mean, the man's wife's face just said it all at the end of the round. Round 2 was pretty much the same as well. Scott was dropped with more spinning kicks. Even in round 3, he was landing hard spinning techniques and just sending Smith flying across the cage. But this is Scott Smith we are talking about, and just when you thought it was in the bag for Kung Lee, Smith caught him. He followed up with a flurry of punches and TKO'd Lee after pretty much losing 13 minutes of that fight. Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier 2. The first meeting of the light heavyweight champion DC and the longest defending heavyweight champ Stipe had ended pretty quickly, but everyone expected the rematch to last at least a little bit longer, but I don't think anyone expected DC to go in there and pretty much dominate the first half of the fight. I mean, he was landing big right hands over and over from the clinch, and it was a wonder that Stipe was just eating them all. By the 4th round though, Stipe had been getting more and more busted up, and he was running out of time to make something happen in the fight. And that's when he started attacking the body with his left hook, and the whole fight changed.
DC knows he's
After about 10 well-placed shots, DC was ready to fall, and Stipe had, in about 60 seconds, completely turned the fight around. Eddie Alvarez versus Edward Faloyang. After winning a UFC title, Eddie had officially won a belt in every promotion he'd been in, so he up and left for Asia and won championship to try and win another, only his debut didn't go as planned. He was TKO'd in just 60 seconds. Now, a few months later, he was back though against Edward Faloyang. This man was a dangerous striker, and early on, he was landing big shots on Eddie.
Faloyang hooks the cut up again off the right hand.
Then out of nowhere, he sat Eddie down with a hard leg kick. Alvarez just looked in complete shock, and then the ground and pound started raining down, and it seemed like his one FC dreams were already over. But somehow, Eddie managed to sweep and get on top, and all of a sudden had locked up a rear naked choke for the win. Turns out Eddie had been so badly hurt he had to withdraw from the rest of the Grand Prix, but he'd still pulled a win out of nowhere. Henry Cejudo versus Marlon Moraes. When the flyweight champ Henry Cejudo went for a second title up at bantamweight and against a much more dangerous and diverse striker who'd also been a champ in another organisation, weren't really sure how the fight was going to play out. Then Magic Marlon came out in the first round and absolutely destroyed Henry with leg kick after leg kick, and they were just sending him sideways. Henry started to rush forward halfway through the second round and started shutting Marlon down. By the third, there was nothing left in the gas tank of the Brazilian, and Henry secured a second world title after it looked almost impossible for him to get a victory. CJ Vergara versus Daniel Lera. In his hometown of San Antonio, CJ Vergara drew fellow UFC newcomer Daniel Lera. Both guys were dangerous strikers who fought at a really high pace, and it didn't take long for Daniel to land a wheel kick and then a follow-up attack that had CJ just running all over the octagon trying to survive. Another wheel kick then dropped him face first onto the canvas, and it looked over, but CJ just about managed to survive to the next round. He came out though in round 2 with Daniel looking a little tired, and CJ put a pace on him, managing to get top position and then ground and pounded him out for the comeback victory. Claudio Puelles versus Felipe Silva. You may have heard of the leg lock machine Puelles. He's got 3 knee bars in the UFC, which is a record and it's pretty cool, but his first one came against Felipe Silva in a fight that he was absolutely not winning. After 3 rounds in Chile, Claudio was looking battered. Felipe had avoided all the submissions and basically had just landed on him non-stop throughout the contest. The commentators were basically dismissing the fight as already over, and also that Puelles was too tough for his own good, not something you ever want to hear. But out of nowhere, Claudio dived on an incredibly tight knee bar and forced the tap, and the Chilean stadium went fucking mental. Mike Russo versus Todd Duffy. So there was this guy called Todd Duffy in the UFC at one point. You may have just seen him fight at BKFC. But in the UFC, he was a different fighter. He debuted in 7 seconds and got a crazy KO and was 6-0, undefeated, ready to smash the heavyweight division. The UFC kind of lowballed him, Mike Russo, in his next matchup, and he came out like a freight train, unloading piston punches on Mike, almost knocking him flat out early. Now, as badly as he started beating up Mike, and it was bad, after 10 minutes, Russo had only hit Todd 10 times, and they were basically harmless slaps. He'd also failed on 9 takedowns, and it felt like Todd could have finished him a couple of times. And then, with about 2.5 minutes left, out of nowhere, Mike landed a right hand and KO'd Todd. Nobody saw that coming. Mike had been beaten non-stop the entire contest. Travis Brown versus Alistair Overeem. Overeem was of course one of the scariest heavyweights ever. 11 fights in a row he won, where he blasted through everyone else on the planet, including Brock Lesnar. Then he was beating up Bigfoot Silva until the 3rd round, where the giant man came back and blasted him. Now that could have been on here if it wasn't as bad as the Travis Brown fight. Overeem came forward against Travis and immediately started attacking with punches and nasty knees. Then he took him down and was blasting him, more damage against the cage. It just wasn't looking good for Travis. He was getting beaten everywhere. But then just when he thought Brown didn't have anything left, he started spamming front kicks. 10 front kicks in a row, actually, and the last one worked. He landed on the chin in an incredibly surprising KO against the guy who was supposed to be the best striker in the heavyweight division. Magny versus Hector Lombard. If you didn't see what Hector Lombard was doing to people outside the UFC, you may have saved yourself a few nightmares. Then he dropped 170 pounds and won 3 UFC fights in a row and was just juiced to the gills with confidence. The UFC booked him against Magny, and he basically just started putting a beating on him.
Have a long reach like, oh!
Neil survived to the 2nd round and was coming back in the fight, but then he got dropped again. Hector went for a leg lock though, don't ask me why, and from there Neil started to get on top and batter him like your Friday fish and chips.
Referee watching things closely here.
Hector ended up basically having nothing left in the tank, and it was a dramatic comeback for Magny, who's kind of made a career out of it. Matt Schnell versus Sumadaji. The fight between these two ranked flyweight bangers absolutely stole the show on ABC. It's not exactly the most watched division, but for 2 rounds, these two went back and forth until Sumadaji started to find his range and began unloading an ungodly amount of punishment on Matt. Everyone in the crowd was just waiting for him to fall down as Sumadaji kept landing bomb after bomb after bomb. Matt, though, stayed on game plan, managed to get a takedown and top position, and then destroyed Sumadaji with ground and pound, and then subbed him from top position. Matt had been covered in blood, but pulled out a crazy roller coaster comeback. It was an epic round, to be sure. Matt Hughes versus Frank Trigg 2. After having an incredibly dominant run for the UFC's welterweight division and having just beaten GSP, Matt Hughes started taking rematches to defend his title. He went up against old rival Frank Trigg, who'd got a shot in his debut initially and had been finished in the 1st round, but now he had more experience. Didn't seem to matter though, as 48 seconds into the fight, Frank kneed Matt in the balls. He got Matt on the ground and the beating continued for about 2 minutes as we all thought the champ was about to lose his title, and just as Frank locked up a rear naked choke, we saw Matt turn back into him, pick him up, run across the cage and crash him into the earth.
Here we go!
I couple of seconds later, Frank was stretched out and Mac sunk in the rear naked choke and once again got the tap in dramatic fashion. Abel Trujillo versus Jamie Varner. Back in the day, the UFC threw two classic lightweight gunslingers together to set fire to a barn and throw punches at each other. Now these guys throw harder and faster than most lightweights, and Jamie started landing some massive punches and even nearly choked Abel out. After that, Trujillo just started swanging and banging, trying to take his head off. That really only ended up with Abel taking more and more punches as he was getting wobbled around by the former WEC champion.
Probably the most dangerous challenge.
It looked like Abel was done, his back was to the fence just covering up, but right when you thought it was over, he landed a massive right hand and flatlined Varner. I mean, based on his celebration alone, I think you can tell how close Trujillo was to defeat, and it was the definition of an insane comeback. Jack Hermansson versus Thales Leites. A lot of hardcore MMA fans are secret Jack Hermansson supporters, and it's because of shit like this. In the second round, Jack Hermansson's rib gets dislocated. He then nearly gets choked out, but somehow survived. At the end of the round, Jack can barely get back to his feet, and in the corner, he's literally screaming in pain.
Commission table.
Hermansson's down 2 rounds, he's got a dislocated rib, but he needs a finish. So what does he do? He starts a third round with a flying knee. I'm sure at this point, the only thing Hermansson heard was the sound of Viking war drums in his ears, and after almost getting finished again with an anaconda choke, Jack managed to get top position and dropped hellacious ground and pound until he destroyed Laces. I don't think I've ever seen someone so badly injured and also have to rally for a comeback. Absolutely superhuman levels of toughness, and this was totally insane. Roger Huerta versus Clay Guida. The 21-1 prospect Roger Huerta was being hyped as one of the best prodigies ever in the UFC when he went up against Clay Guida, but the Carpenter gave him all he could handle. The pace Guida put on him was that of a hungry caveman. Roger was taken down, beaten up, punched in the face, which was basically not happening to him that much at all in his career at this point. He almost got choked out at one point, but basically by the start of the third round, it was apparent that this new prodigy had been outworked and outscrapped. They stared each other across the cage and they looked like they were ready to die. Roger came out charging him down, landed a big knee, and in 30 seconds had Clay tap into a rear naked choke. Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard. New Jersey man Frankie E got a reputation in MMA early for being virtually unstoppable, and as a smaller man in the weight class, it only made it even more impressive. When he did fight for a UFC title though, it was against a guy he'd already lost to in Gray Maynard, so he wasn't given that much of a chance, and then Gray came out in that fight and dropped him 3 times in the first round. He was throwing murderous power punches and Edgar had been rolling across the canvas, but he didn't go out and fought his way back to a close draw, getting him another shot at Gray. In the rematch, the same thing almost happened again. This time Frankie would survive until the 5th round, where he broke down Gray and finished him after an insane 10 rounds of fighting where he was pretty much getting beaten up for most of it. Yair Rodriguez versus the Korean Zombie. On paper, this was one of the most exciting fights of all time. 2 guys with crazy striking styles, and when they did fight across 25 minutes, they went back and forth. But the Zombie was slowly picking apart the Mexican Warrior. He'd let the fight slip away from him, and the only thing he could do as 10 seconds was sounded was call the Zombie into a final slugfest.
Oh, nice body kick. One more flurry. Oh!
With 1 second left on the clock, Yair pulled out one of the most insane strikes you'll ever see.
It was an elbow. Oh my God! Oh my God!
It wasn't until we saw the replay that the reality of what happened settled in, and it is one of the most insane comeback finishes of all time. Derek Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. It actually took Derek Lewis 14 fights into his UFC career before he really started getting noticed by anyone. He was 11-3 in the UFC when he found himself in the title eliminator against former Bellator champ Alexander Volkov. Now, Derek had never been the most technical striker, but across 15 minutes, Volkov showed his championship class, outmaneuvering and landing some pretty nasty strikes. It just seemed like he was a level above Derek on the feet, and it looked like he'd given up. It wasn't until there was just 20 seconds left on the clock where that big right hand finally landed. He'd somehow KO'd Volk, got a UFC title shot, and took his shorts off, all within about 60 seconds of a guaranteed loss. Darren Elkins versus Mirsad Bektik. At one point, Miesha Bektic was one of the most hyped prospects in the featherweight division. 11-0, he'd looked super impressive, and then he went up against the vet Darren Elkins. Now, everyone expected Bektic to put on another dominating performance, and at first he did. I mean, more than that. He was splitting open Darren's face, just looked levels above him. Now, that carried on pretty much until the final round, but they don't call this man the Damage for no reason. In an incredible display of heart and courage, Elkins didn't quit on himself and using sheer will alone turned the tables with just 2 minutes left. He had drained the life out of Bektic until there was nothing left, and he finished the undefeated prospect in a crazy and unbelievable show of determination. Big Nog versus Bob Sapp. What started out as a bit of a freak show fun fight quickly turned into what felt like a life-endangering moment for, at the time, the best heavyweight in MMA. Pride loved a spectacle, and putting their champ and king of durability Big Nog against the giant man Bob Sapp was exactly how they sold tickets. I don't think anyone expected the beast, though, to almost kill Big Nog in the opening seconds. Oh my god, so many people on the planet wouldn't have survived that, and then Bob essentially tried to pulp Nogueira's head like a pumpkin for the rest of the round. Of course though, he eventually got tired after 14 minutes of insanity where Nogueira took some massive punches and he still managed to pull off the armbar victory. Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 2. Not many people were convinced that Usman was undisputedly the best welterweight in the UFC when he won the title, but 5 defenses later and he'd done things no one thought he was capable of, and more than ever he looked like an invincible figure. Hope had been placed in Leon Edwards, but when they met in Salt Lake City, Usman dominated pretty much the entire fight. He walked through Leon's game plan and he started to look defeated. Going into the 5th round, his corner were trying to light a fire under him.
Listen, stop feeling sorry for this fucking stuff. Well, come on then. What's wrong with you? You're too fucking down. You gotta pull the shit out of the fire.
He hadn't really pulled the trigger yet, and Kamaru had kind of walked all over him, but after an inspiring speech from his coach, he let rip with a perfect head kick with just 60 seconds left.
That is a degenerate.
It was an unbelievable comeback from out of nowhere, but more than that, he had ended a 10-year-long unbeaten streak, a championship reign, and it made absolutely everyone's jaws fall off their face. Frank Mir versus Big Nog 2. Two of the best submission artists to ever do it at heavyweight had existed in different MMA promotions for the longest time, but we finally got to see them fight in 2008, and it ended in a knockout. Frank Mir and Big Nog rematched a few years later, and the fight started to play out very differently, and this time it was Nog who dropped Frank with big punches.
Start for Big Nog. He connects again.
I mean, Joe Rogan thought Frank had already gone unconscious, and surely it was revenge for Big Nog, but he wanted to submit him.
Sprawling. Oh, he's got a guillotine.
That turned out to be a big mistake though, as Frank survived the knockdown and the sub attempt, got top position, and in one of the most exciting scrambles in MMA, managed to tap the Pride submission legend. Houston Alexander versus Cejudo. You might not have heard of Shark Fights, the promotion, but I'm betting you've heard of either Houston Alexander or Cejudo. Two inexperienced fighters who made it to the highest level because of their ability to basically knock anyone out regardless of skill level. Very quickly, we found out.
Houston Alexander. He could be out.
Behind his thigh.
How is he hanging on?
Houston, I think we have a problem. The beating continued, but somehow Alexander managed to not go unconscious.
Right hook. Dropped Alexander.
Round 2 started, and yeah, it was pretty insane when Houston completely flipped the script and started mashing Cejudo against the fence.
Alexander now. He's going to work. He's dropped Cejudo.
He then did his best pneumatic drill impression and got the W after an absolutely insane comeback where he looked like he went unconscious about 3 times. Brock Lesnar versus Shane Carwin. These two fought for the UFC heavyweight title, and it felt like two giants colliding. Carwin had looked so dominant, and that immediately continued in the championship fight against Brock. He literally had Lesnar running for his life and turning up as he shelled him with absolute bombs for almost 3 straight minutes.
Have begun. Carwin with the uppercut. Big uppercut.
Lesnar, though, proved to be one tough SOB and somehow was the first person to survive the first round. Brock had been absolutely mauled, but he took down a now tired Shane Carwin and found the submission. I think almost everyone was sure the fight was seconds from being over, but Brock has stayed conscious, stayed in the fight, and stayed a UFC champion. Nathaniel Wood versus Josh Reed. Okay, so we kind of had a bit of a rule when making this video that comebacks that happened in the first round didn't really count. Obviously, we've made a few exceptions, and well, round 1 of this fight might be one of the craziest in the history of MMA. Nathan Wood was defending his Cage Warriors title, and once the action started about 30 seconds into this one, it lasted right up until the end of the fight. Josh Reed rocked Nathaniel and then essentially unleashed hell.
Oh, Reed, absolutely launching. He can't, he's trying to tie up the upper body, but he's taking a close look at this one.
But just when you thought the fight was over, Wood found his moment to turn the tables.
This is incredible.
Incredible comeback from the prospect who tried to stay in the fight the whole time, and even though it's only about 2.5 minutes, what an insane sequence and one of the best comebacks ever. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen. Anyone Anderson Silva fought from 2006 to 2012 was pretty much immediately written off. He'd schooled everyone who stepped into the UFC cage with him, and considering Chael Sonnen's record at the time was 26-10, I mean, not many people thought he had much of a chance. But his wrestling proved to be as good as he said it was. For 5 rounds, Chael found a way to beat the GOAT Anderson Silva, put him on his back, and punch him in the face. There was still 2 minutes left on the clock, but there was no way he was going to win this on the scorecards, and he was still flat on his back. That's when he threw up a triangle choke.
He's got his legs across. That's what's he's tapping it.
Clearly he didn't want to, but Chael tapped, and the legacy of Anderson Silva kept going for another 2 years. Sakuraba versus Smirnovas. After Saku's time as the hero of Pride was kind of over, despite being out of his prime, the man didn't retire. He kept on fighting in Japan and other promotions. He entered the light heavyweight Grand Prix in Heroes and got the dangerous European Smirnovas. And it wasn't long into the fight that Saku got dropped, and well, I think maybe even knocked out. Absolutely horrific ground and pound there, and it only got stopped because he was caught up in the ropes. Otherwise, I think it would have just been a TKO. But then it got even worse. So much punishment. Honestly, I think they would have let Saku die in that ring. When they got back to the feet, it looked like he could barely stand up. But then the unthinkable happened. This fight pretty much encapsulates all of the reasons people love Sakuraba. I mean, it was a one-night tournament and he obviously had to pull out of the rest of it because he wasn't medically cleared to fight. No shit. But that man just got knocked out and still found a way to win the fight. Paul Craig versus Ankalaev. The Scottish submission expert came into the UFC as a pretty green fighter, but was still thrown right into the deep end of the light heavyweight division. After losing 2 in a row, his career and UFC contract was on the line, and then he was given the undefeated new Russian prodigy Ankalaev. No one expected Craig to win, and Magomed dominated the fight across 3 rounds. But with 10 seconds left and no hope in sight, with thoughts of his UFC career flashing through his head, Paul threw up a last-second triangle choke.
Oh, look at this!
Triangle set up.
Oh,
No one could believe it. Paul had lost 14 minutes and 59 seconds of that fight. Not only did he get the 1 second comeback after an absolute beating, but he'd secured himself a UFC career. And of course, finally, Czech Congo versus Pat Barry. I mean, I couldn't not put this one at the top of the list. It's so iconic and it's just so much fun. 2 high-level strikers, Pat Barry and Czech Congo, met in Pittsburgh in the main event of a fight that would never be forgotten in MMA history. Both guys were absolute powerhouses and all hell broke loose. Pat caught Congo with a monster right hook that already had Joe Rogan saying it's over. And it pretty much was. I mean, Congo looks like he gets knocked out about 3 different times.
Pat Barry looking to finish.
It looked like he was out. Oh,
He is now.
He's out.
Gets back to his feet and blasts Pat with one right hand that put him out immediately.
Barry looking to finish the fight. He got right. Pat Barry's down. It's all over. Check Congo has
Joe Rogan completely lost his mind, and so did the entire fucking arena. It's one of the more impossible examples of a human refusing to go unconscious. Absolutely insane fight. Might be part superhero. I doubt we'll ever see anything like this again, but it has to be the most unbelievable comeback ever. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that rundown of basically every comeback I could think of /find/ I went for a lot of them, okay? Shout out to Luke Taylor. This was a difficult edit. I know it was, but he encapsulated it all. Go follow him at @CoolToMe_. Show him some support. He's got a new YouTube channel as well. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you want to see more on the channel as well, we have the membership program. You can check it out right now, just $2.99 full access there, unedited podcast. Thank you to all those Hall of Famers who are already joined with us. We appreciate you. Thank you for the support every single week. Do give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and a subscribe as well if you want to see more from us. We do a lot of videos every single week, but I've been Balian. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next one.